This war between good and evil we are in. We are not at peace. Therefore, we are at war. We might want to debate the nature and extent of the war, but if we are not at peace, and we surely are not, then we are at war. Saying this is important, because now it lets us get on with talking about this war. The next issue people will bring up is that it is labeled a war of good versus evil. If there were not two sides, it would not be a war. There would be nothing to fight about, if both sides did not think they were right and the other wrong. The complaint might then be raised, but these are differing opinions, not good and evil. If this is so, what are we fighting about? Is it that some prefer butter on their bread and someone else likes cream cheese? Little disagreements do not blossom into wars. If a war is not about good and evil, then on what basis is it being fought? Not only is there no reason to fight a war without the concept or conception of good and evil, but there is also no clear conception of winning. If both causes are good and the end result inconsequential, then why was the war fought? The culture may not have equivalent terms, but they have a mental conception of good and evil. As good as this sounds, it is actually a testament to the meaninglessness of the terms, in the conventional sense. If both sides are convinced of their own goodness and the evilness of the other, the terms themselves must lack meaning. Yet, by their own terms, good and evil have to be on the opposite ends of an infinite continuum, or at least this is how this world thinks of things. And it is because of this depiction of good and evil as relative concepts that the world fails to understand good and evil or how to discern one from the other. Yet, even while saying this, we know it cannot be done, in this very conception. We cannot define good and evil as discrete things if we occupy a relativistic worldview. Yet, the world grasps the concept but does not have the means to implement. Knowing there is good and evil but not knowing what it is or how to measure it, they cut it out of whole cloth and paste it where they think appropriate. This is why there are wars. The labeling of something, even the motives of an army, as good or bad is totally random. This is not the way it was supposed to be. If there is a good and evil, then there must be a way to divide what is good from what is evil, one from the often to do we hear that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. But is it only terrorists who say this? We are told that it is the victor that writes history, as if good was simply a perspective held by the victorious nation. But do the good win all the wars, and if not, why not? Atheists and others do not think it matters if we start from God or from the universe as matter, but we will see that it does. If we assume that the earth is composed of a substance that can be stimulated into a response, then good and evil cannot be real. Good and evil would not have corporeal substance as other material things have substance. Therefore, if reality has substance, analytical elements are simple abstractions without an existential independence. Good would not be something that has an existence beyond the brain. If everything is matter and everything is causality, what room is left for good and evil? All there is room for is strong and weak. This gives us the law of the jungle. The ability to fight and kill is not evenly distributed. The strong always rule the weak. The rule of the weak by the strong is correlated with the exploitation of the labor of the weak. The property of the weak is concentrated in the hands of the strong. Over time, the exploitation and concentration of wealth will become normalized, and being what is normal, it is accepted. The situation will be regulated by the state, to make the situation seem controlled and more tolerable for those who are being exploited. Too many governments have fallen victim to power and greed. They take too much, and they take it too fast, until the people are forced to rebel. When they take property from us, they take power. When they take power, they have the ability to take our property. This is the way of the jungle. The jungle only knows one thing, and that is power. Physical power is enough at the lower end of things. The man with physical power has the ability to take property from those who are weak. This includes the taking of women. The reality of this is not something which the spiritually immature wants to hear. But the spiritually immature man has always considered this to be as right just because he can. If we understand what is being said and what is going on, it presents us with an interesting dynamic, because the war is the spiritually mature against those who see no reason to fight. The spiritually immature will not fight against evil. They see no reason to fight. The spiritually immature will seek conciliation and negotiated settlements. The spiritual immature never take a stand because nothing is their responsibility. But the biggest problem for the immature is their own immaturity. They are never able to take responsibility for their own actions. They do not want to pay their costs and do not think they should have to. The spiritual immature are all freeloaders and parasites. In aspects of their behavior, the spiritually immature remain infants, at best they are juveniles. They do not think they are able or obliged to pay their own way. Ultimately, the spiritually immature fight their obligation to repay the cost of their existence. They do not marry or have children because they do not want to repay the cost their own childhood created. We are all born of man and woman, and it took considerable resources to raise us to maturity. The longer the immature stage, the more it costs to raise the child. Some mature faster than others. But we are all supposed to mature at some point and have children to replace us. As our parents had children to repay their social debt, and their parents had our parents to repay their social debt, going back through time, all those born of man and woman ought to have children to repay the debt childhood creates. The spiritual immature break this bond and what is essentially a social contract. What the spiritual the obligations of maturity, their own future self. When Scripture tells us we do not fight flesh and blood, but principalities and powers and spiritual wickedness in the highest places, what this is telling us is that we are fighting our own demons. The forces that keep us immature. Idols are merely representations of our own fantasized selves, they are akin to toys for adults. Invisible friends for children that refuse to face the future. Idols represent the demons of children that we try to placate by being good in our own eyes. The spiritually mature are persons who have accepted maturity. They have embraced the realization it is time they grew up and took their place in the ranks of the church. This brings us to where we ask, is it wrong to be an adult? Is it wrong to pay one's one way and not be a burden on society? But if acquiring or accepting maturity is good, then what of those who remain a burden? What of those who never pay their way nor intend to ever live up to their obligations? If we assume those who mature, have accepted the responsibilities of adulthood and pay their own way, are doing what is right, then those who do not do this are not doing what is good and proper. We all know, life is not free. It takes work to create civilization. If we are all equal, we all are under the same obligations. If civilization is desirable, then adding value to the world and not externalizing costs onto society and future generations to pay, must be good. But if you agree the spiritual mature are good, there is no choice but to wage war against those who will not pay their own way. Good and evil are two distinct and incompatible categories. There is no overlap. The good pay their own way and the evil do not. The evil are dependents of the good, long before they ought to be. It is as simple as that. But if we are truly good, we will wage war against the spiritually immature and the costs they impose on us. No one is obliged to pay the costs of another. No one has the right to live off of the labor of another. This is war, because it is an attack against the spiritually mature and our right to be paid for the work we do. The church that does not fight this war is not a church, for it is not fighting the enemies of Christ.